Was the 1972 Old 442 muscle car or just muscle memory? Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution. Here once again at the Martin Auto Museum, a great collection, more than 170 cars here in Phoenix that tell all kinds of interesting stories. And this particular car right here, this 1972 Olds, well, isn't quite what it looks to be. It says it's a 442, but in reality, it's a recreation. I'm not even going to call it a clone. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But it's a good way to give a jumping off point to talk about the Olds 442 and the significance that car had, as well as the W30 package, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. But first, make sure you like and subscribe down below. And of course, in the comments, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong, and what do you think about the idea of cloning or recreating old cars? Is it good? Does it kind of, diminish the breed? Either way, I want your opinions on it. All right, before we talk too much about this particular car right here, I want to give a little bit of history about the 442 in the Oldsmobile world. Now, the 442 name started in 1964 as an option on the Cutlass and the F85. The number stood for 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual, and dual exhaust. And by the way, that designation changes over the years. By 1965, the 442 gained more power and a little bit of an attitude. It moved from a simple package to a serious muscle machine. And by the late 60s, well, it became its own model with big engines and bold styling. In 1970, the 442 hit its peak. You could get a massive 455 cubic inch V8 and the legendary W30 performance package. It was fast, it was loud, and it was built to take on the best. By 1972, though, things started to change. Stricter emission rules, rising insurance costs began to tame the muscle cars. The 442 was still sharp looking, but the golden era was fading. Let's take a moment to talk about the W30 designation and its importance. It first appeared on the 442 back in 1966. It was a factory performance upgrade. It included hotter camshaft, better carburation, special air induction system, and heavy-duty components that were designed for just one thing: drag racing, going fast over a quarter mile. The early W30 even had air scoops that had to be installed by the dealer that brought in air from under the bumper. Throughout the late 1960s, the early 70s, the W30 was the ultimate 442 performance package. Had the biggest engines, famously that 455 V8, had functional fiberglass hoods, aluminum intake manifolds, tuned suspensions, and some very distinctive red inner fender liners that we'll talk about in just a moment. But as we got into the 70s, remember I mentioned those tightening emission controls that lowered the compression on the engines, and it really took away the performance edge of the W30 package. The name itself, like the 442 name, stuck around, but the legacy as a serious quarter-mile performance package, well, didn't quite live on with the W30 name. Now, as I mentioned, this car that we have here at the museum is a recreation. Not only is it not a real W30, it's not even an original 442. Somewhere along the line, someone took a base Cutlass and turned it into a 442. Now, some people call this cloning it, they call it reproductions, recreation, whatever you want to call it. It took what was a car that didn't have a lot of value, a plain Jane Cutlass, and gave it a little more style, well, a little more fun, shall we call it. Now, there's a big debate within the automotive collecting world. Should you be doing this? Is it taking down the value of the original cars? Is it pretending to be something it's not? I always say, as long as the owner is truthful and tells the next buyer that it's a recreation, then it's kind of no harm, no foul. The reality is there's no way to tell whether it was a Cutlass or a 442 in the VIN. You could, however, tell if it was a W30, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But it goes back to the point that, why not have a little bit of fun? Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, wait a minute. Why would you have a recreation here in the museum? Well, right now we don't have a real 442. And until we get one, this is a great way to let people look at a 442 style, get the feeling of what it was like, have that conversation about what 442 meant. So it has a good place here in the museum until we get a real 442. Well, under the hood of our 442 recreation that we have here at the museum, We have an Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch engine, and while it's not the big 455 that should have come in a W30 package, the base engine, not this modified version, is something that absolutely would have been in a 442 in 72. That's because the 442 name was really just a handling and trim package, and you could get it with either of the available engines. And I recall, I think there was a 160 horsepower and a 180 horsepower version. Now, the Oldsmobile 350 and the Chevy 350 shared the same displacement, but they're really completely different engines. The Olds 350 was part of the Oldsmobile small block family, had a taller deck height, different bore, different stroke. It even had some unique internal parts. It used its own heads, its own intake manifold, even had a different firing order than the Chevy 350. Now, if this had been a real W30 car, the original owner would have paid an extra $648, and that would have gotten him the 300 horsepower 455. As I mentioned, this one doesn't have an X in the VIN, so we know it didn't come that way. That would have meant it was born with the 455. The Oldsmobile 455 V8 debuted in 1968, and it was the largest engine Olds had ever built, designed for big cars and high-performance models like the 442 and the Tornado. It had a huge low-end torque, which made even the heavy Oldsmobiles feel quick off the line. At its peak, the high-performance W30 version produced 370 horsepower and more than 500 pound-feet of torque in 1970. But by 1971 and 1972, compression ratios and new emissions rules dropped the ability for this thing to pump out massive horsepower. It was down to, well, low-end 160 horsepower, which seems pretty anemic next to the 455. But here's the thing. When you were driving by and the hood was closed, no one knew the difference. All right, hop into the interior of our 442 recreation that we have here at the museum. And if you ordered a 1972 Olds 442, there really wasn't much inside the car that lets you know you got something special. The only thing you really got was an emblem right here that said 442. The rest of the interior was pretty much standard Cutlass. In fact, you had your choice of a bench seat or bucket seats. Quite a few people, though, who are buying the 442 option would go for the bucket seats. They'd also go for the center console and the sport shift. I'll talk about this shifter in just a moment. They go for the sport wheel. The reality was that the interior you got was a Cutlass interior. Probably not quite as flashy, for example, as the Pontiac, not quite as utilitarian as the Chevelle. They try to have a little bit of an elegance to it, some of the wood trim, for example, but it was pretty much a standard Cutlass interior. Now, this particular interior, this has some additions that have been added. To start with, we've got this tack right here that's been added so that you can see it right up front. You've got gauges down below for the transmission temperature, water, oil, volts, and this thing right here, which is very important. This is a B&M ratchet shifter. And this basically turns an automatic transmission into a manual transmission. As you're going along, you ratchet up or down through the gears, as the case may be. So you're actually shifting manually to get the gears that you want. It also has a reverse lockout so that you can't accidentally go into reverse, so that's a good thing. But once again, in 1972, if you were spending, not a whole lot of extra money, but a little bit of extra money to get the 442, you really weren't getting very much special inside. Even if you were spending the big bucks to get that W30 package, there was really nothing inside that was going to go, ooh and ah, I have something special. No special dash, just regular Cutlass interior for the most part. After 1972, the Oldsmobile 442 really shifted away from its muscle car roots. In 73, it was again an option package on the Cutlass, but power was dropping pretty much across the board, as I mentioned, because of the new emissions rules, insurance costs. Big engines like the 455 V8 stuck around for a few years, but they were gone by the mid-70s, replaced by the smaller 350 and even some 260 cubic inch V8s. By 1978, the Cutlass and the 442 moved to GM's new G-body platform. It was lighter and smaller, and through the late 70s and early 80s, the 442 once again was really just a handling and appearance package. It gave stripes, it gave badges, some minor suspension tweaks. That was really all that set it apart from the other Cutlass models. Small revival came in 1985 when the 442 got an actually hotter version of Oldsmobile's 307 cubic inch V8 that was paired with a 4-speed automatic, so it was a little better in terms of performance. It wasn't the powerhouse of the past, but it offered just that hint of performance all the way through 1987. Then the name disappeared until it got an unexpected return in 1990 and 91. Oldsmobile revived the 442 badge on the front-wheel drive Cutlass Calais, but this time the 442 was a four-cylinder. It used the high-output quad-4 inline-4, made a whopping 180 horsepower, but you did get a 5-speed manual and firmer suspension. But after 1991, the 442 name was retired for good, and with the demise of Oldsmobile in 2004, it's not likely that we will ever see it return. And whether the 4s in the 442 name stood for 4-speed, 4-barrel, or 4-cylinder, 442 always stood for cool.